You're listening to the Resilient Author Podcast, the show that goes beyond the pages to explore the grit, courage, and resilience it takes to write and publish a book. I'm your host, Carrie Human, and each week I sit down with authors to uncover the stories behind their stories, the challenges they faced, the breakthroughs they experienced, and the wisdom they've gained along the way. Whether you're working on your first chapter or celebrating your launch, this is the place to find inspiration and practical takeaways for your own author journey. Let's dive in. My guest today is Melissa Robinson-Winemiller, author of The Empathic Leader. She helps leaders turn empathy into real results. We're talking about what empathy actually looks like in practice, how it connects to emotional intelligence, and why it matters even more in the age of AI and big tech. Melissa brings the research and the receipts, including data that links empathic leadership to jumps in productivity, innovation, and profit. She also brings a very human story. After experiencing unempathetic leadership firsthand and walking away from a long career as a musician, she built a practical, outcomes-focused approach leaders can use to create healthier teams and better work. If you lead people or hope to, this conversation will give you tools you can apply today. Let's dive in. All right. So, Melissa, for those who may not know you yet, you know what? Let me stop real quick. I mentioned this in the email, but I'm going to do your bio before the actual podcast. So I'll do that separately, just so you know that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So, let's start by just giving the listeners a snapshot of your work. For those who may not know you yet, Melissa, what's your book about, and what do you hope readers take away from it?
So my book specifically is about emotional intelligence through empathy in leadership. And that's what I study. That's what I do. I'm actually working on my second doctorate in interdisciplinary leadership with a dissertation in empathy and leadership. So, I mean, that's my thing. That's what I want people to look at and to understand. I feel it's really important. I feel it's something that's kind of missing in a lot of leadership positions. But within the book, with what I've written about, it actually does help profit, productivity, and innovation. So it's for people that do pick it up and learn how to use it, it's really a win-win situation.
Mm. You know, it's really interesting. I feel like there are a lot of people who look at leadership as this thing where you're this dominant personality. You don't really listen, you're talking. And your book seems to sort of come at this from a completely different angle. Initially, when you're talking about empathy and leadership, do you find that you get pushback, or do you feel people have been pretty receptive to the concept?
I'd say it's about half and half. And
Mm.
I'd actually say it's starting to lean more towards people wanting to hear more about it. I mean, you think of some people that have gotten into top leadership positions, they've gotten there doing something right. And if that something doesn't include empathy, they're not necessarily going to be open to changing. But if you look at, middle managers and people that do deal with people every day, directors, vice presidents, that mid-level, they really see a difference that connection and understanding between people can make. And they're actually really open to hearing more, especially when they understand, one of the things I talk about in the book that is that empathy isn't necessarily about feelings. There's 43 definitions of empathy that fall under 8 broad categories. And feelings fit in there, but it's not all of it. Really what it's about is connection and understanding through taking the perspective of the other. And once they understand that and they realize it's not all like fluffy bunnies and rainbows, usually they take it a little more seriously.
Mm. You put that really well. And I want to get more into the book. But before we do that, I want to talk just a little bit more about your journey as an author. How did this idea for the book first come to you? Like, how did you even start talking and researching and writing about this?
Well, I was already doing a podcast. And so I was doing research for that and I was working on stuff for that. And I was also already into my dissertation. So I was doing research for that. And it was just kind of like, if I'm going to do all this research and I'm going to put all this together, why not put something out there that's going to be accessible for people in the field, people in the trenches, and in the process, maybe some people will be like, yeah, that's a really good idea. So I decided since I was neck deep in it, why not?
Mhm. That's a really good reason to move forward. I mean, Was the catalyst for you even doing your work on this? Did it come from you working in places where you had sort of these empathetic leaders, or was it the opposite? Like, was there a moment when you're like, I need to write this book. I need to get this out in the world?
Oh yeah. No, it was definitely the opposite. And the more people I talk to, the more I feel that a lot of people have that same experience dealing with toxic leadership and toxic workplaces. Just an understanding that things can't keep going on the way they have been because it's breaking people, and that's not okay.
Mm. It's a really good point. I know we've all probably had a toxic boss or two. So,
Yeah.
so Melissa, your book, it explores emotional intelligence through the lens, as you said, of empathy and leadership. So I know you talked about this is something that was inspired by being in, maybe a more toxic environment. But what's one insight you hope every leader walks away with when they read this book and learn that you can lead with your heart, you can lead with empathy?
That it really has to start with self-empathy. A lot of these leaders are very ambitious, they're very driven. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy, they're very high self-actualized. But because of that, they don't always give themselves much empathy, which is why, you end up with so much burnout. You end up with addictions, you end up with family problems. And if they start with self-empathy and actually being able to understand and connect with themselves first, they can not only help mitigate some of this stuff, but they're going to be able to connect to others first. Because charity starts at home, right? If we can't connect to ourselves, how are we ever going to connect to anybody else? It's just not going to happen.
Yes. Connecting with self. Again, obviously, we don't want to give the book away, but are you able to share maybe one or two ways where someone could start to connect with themselves?
Sure. Yeah. I actually talk about kind of a 4-step framework. And I have a second book that I should be out in about a year, hopefully, and I go into this a lot deeper.
Hmm.
But if you start with self-observation and just stepping outside yourself without judgment, because empathy and judgment can't exist in the same space, and just watching what you're doing, that then moves to self-reflection, where you turn the lens inward, you start to see your intent, you start to understand, well, why did I react when I was triggered in that way? Well, why did I suddenly make that snap decision? From self-reflection comes hopefully self-awareness, where you turn the lens out and you see the impact of what you're doing on the world. And once you have those 3 things in place, you can start to move to self-empathy.
Mm, mm.
I know that sounds easy. Nothing is ever that easy. It never works out that neatly. But in a grand scheme, that's kind of how it goes.
Yeah, high level. You have to start somewhere. You have to
Yes.
start somewhere. And
Yes.
speaking of starting somewhere, I have the privilege to talk to a lot of authors, and we all know there's a lot of resistance and doubt that comes with getting a book out into the world. Was there, ever a point for you when you started to question, whether this book would actually come out or not? And if so, how did you push through that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I had originally thought this book would come out last September, and it didn't come out until July.
Mm.
So, just, I mean, in our field, we have a lot of fantastic people, publishers and editors and people that are there to help. But we also have some people that are a little on the predatory side, which is, I mean, that's any field. I don't think it's just publishing.
Mm.
But the first person that I ran into definitely shouldn't have been doing publishing, and I think was looking to make a fast buck. And I was naive about what I was doing. I could write the book, but I didn't know anything about, the actual publishing industry. And between that and then the next person I ran into thought they could just feed the whole thing to AI and that it was good enough. You know, After both of those, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. But it was like, okay, I've made it this far. I've gotten a really good recommendation from someone who's supposed to be an excellent publisher. Third time's the charm, right? So I pushed through and was able to actually get it published on the third try. But it took a little bit of stubbornness.
Yeah, well, you talk about persistence. Yeah, just to your point, I mean, there are so many different offers out there to get your book published. And yeah, if you're working with someone who doesn't really know what they're talking about, or like you said, is just trying to make a quick buck, um, it can be really painful. So it's really good that you had the foresight to just push through that. Because obviously this book needs to be out in the world, and I'm glad you finished it. I'm glad you finished it.
Well, thank you. Me too. Because same, I feel it needs to be out there. I mean, I feel like it's something that needs to be said. And we live in a time where there's so much friction and people are at odds, and it's on TV and it's in the news and it's in daily life, and it's like we need a balance to that. Things are tipping way to the edge of not having empathy, and we can fix it, but we have to fix it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It starts with us. So speaking of we can fix it, how did writing this book, change you personally or in your work? Now that you're an author, have you noticed any shifts?
Oh yeah. I By having to actually put it down and write it and put it in a way that others could understand, I really had to crystallize my own thinking, and to understand this is how I feel all this needs to go, and okay, this makes sense. This really doesn't make sense. I need to go back to the drawing board, that sort of thing. But the other side of that too, I mean, speaking of the toxic work environment, the start of each chapter is a little bit of a narrative of a particularly toxic work environment I was in, where I actually had an assault. And I mean, it was 7 years and it was really hard. And I start each chapter with a little bit of that because I want people to see how damaging this kind of toxic environment can be. But actually putting that out and making it visible has changed me a lot, because it's something I thought I would hide forever. And all of a sudden, now anybody can get a hold of it. And that's a little bit scary. So you kind of have to face your own demons to be able to say, all right, I feel this is important enough that I'm willing to be that vulnerable. It's kind of
Mhm.
scary.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned working with a publisher. Was the publisher a coach as well, or did you have family support, or were you just kind of working through it yourself?
Just working through it myself. My husband's fantastic support. He's been great, but by the time I got it to the third publisher, I mean, it had been edited and gone over and combed through so many times. It didn't really need much. It needed a little bit of finesse, but it didn't need a ton of things. And I didn't really have a coach, because I just kind of dove into it and said, well, what's the best that can happen?
Yeah.
And just went
Yeah.
for it. So it was just kind of me and my husband cheering me on.
Mhm. Have you always sort of had that personality where you just jump in, or was this a newer experience for you?
No, that's kind of what I do. In fact, sometimes it would be smart if I didn't just jump in, but that's kind of me.
Yeah. I can appreciate that. Definitely not one to wait on the sidelines or for the coast to be clear. Sometimes you just gotta go for it.
Yeah.
Mm,
Well, and I do, people say, what's the worst that can happen? And I do try to hang on to, well, what's the best that can happen? Who
I love
knows?
that. I love that question. So I would love to just go a little bit more into the book. I did have a chance to just kind of skim through it, and I pulled a couple things that I just wanted to bring to our interview today. So you spoke about experiencing unempathetic leadership firsthand. You talked about this a little bit earlier, but would you be open to just taking us back to a moment, just to that moment in particular, and how it led you to really like dedicate your work to building more emotional, intelligent leaders?
Sure. I mean, the thing is I don't know that there was an actual moment. So, I
Mhm.
mean, I was a musician for a long time, and I was a professor, and that's where, I was assaulted, and I saw this horribly unempathic leadership that happened. And it went on for years. I mean, it went on for almost 7 years by the time it got to the end of it. And after I left that field, I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd been a musician my whole life. It's not like that lends itself to something easily.
Mhm.
So I spun out for about another 6 years. But during that time, I just kept trying to figure out what had gone wrong. And by then my husband and I were doing some consulting in healthcare, and I kept seeing the same lack of emotional intelligence just cropping up over and over. And the hard thing was, a lot of times these people weren't malicious. I mean, there were some toxic people for sure. But a lot of times it was just like they didn't know. They didn't know how to use it. They didn't know it was an active thing. They didn't know, that this was something that it's nice to have, but you have to use it, emotional intelligence and empathy. And finally, I guess if there was a single moment, I was at a healthcare facility, which you would think healthcare should have more empathy and not less, right?
Mhm.
And I had just come back from some pulmonary emboli in my lungs, and I'd had to be in the ER overnight, and
Wow.
it was scary because I'd never really been in the hospital. And I had just started this job. So when I went in, I went to talk to my boss, and I'm like, I don't have time off. I don't have PTO. I don't have, the stuff that people get after you've been there a certain amount of time, but this is what happened. And she didn't say anything. She just kind of gave me this pouty face and then walked away. And it was just kind of like, we have got to stop treating each other like this.
Mm.
This is not okay. And this is in healthcare. I had a health scare at a healthcare facility, and this is the reaction I got. I mean, not even a sorry, not even a hope you're feeling better, not a nothing. So I think if there was a defining moment, that was finally the culmination of all of it, where it was like, we've got to stop this before we destroy ourselves.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Wow. I guess I'm just curious, that particular response, I think some people could say, perhaps things are changing a bit, but some people could say that's the norm for some. You're at work, you need to figure it out kind of thing. We talked about this earlier, but some people still see empathy as soft. It's weakening you. How do you respond to leaders who just don't see its business value? Like they just cannot internalize in their brain that empathy actually is better for business. What do you say to them?
Well, usually the first thing I do is point out that it's not necessarily about feelings, that it is a hard skill. It's something that can be learned. And the second thing I point out is this Ernst Young study. And I mean, Big Four global consultancy. It's Ernst Young. It's,
Mhm.
not Jack's consultancy down the block. These guys are a big deal, you know. And they did a study, it was more like a survey in 2021. And they were looking at the Great Resignation and what was going on. And they looked specifically at empathy. And what they found in this study was that with empathy, if you have leaders that can effectively use it, it increases productivity by 87%, innovation by 86%, and profit by 84%. And that's not my opinion. That's the hard data.
Mm.
So unless you want to show me data that says that's not right, that's what I'm going with. And I haven't found it yet.
Wow. So where do you think, I wouldn't say where do you think the sort of the corporate world has gone wrong? Because I do think a lot of things are changing, but why do you think that has been so backward? So what is the narrative that, like you said, the numbers are there, but in reality, that's still not the case. Like, what do you think where's the misinformation coming?
We don't really teach it in this
Mhm.
country. Other countries teach social emotional learning and they instill empathy in their kids starting at like 6 and going up to 16 in some cases. I
Mm.
mean, the big example is like the Norse countries, Iceland, Denmark, Finland, those guys. And they do go from 6 to 16. And those countries are in the Gallup top 10 happiest nations on earth every year and have been since the 70s.
Mm.
Does it correlate? Does it not? I don't know, maybe. But the point is that they actually teach it and we in the United States don't. So we don't think of empathy as a learnable skill. We don't think of it as something that we can actually use to make things better. There were another pair of studies in some MBA programs where they talked to students and they had them rank, top 10 soft skills that they thought were important. And in both studies, empathy came in dead last.
Wow.
So I think a lot of it is in our perception of what empathy is and how it works. Because if that's how people are when they're students, it's not going to get better when they suddenly become leaders.
No, no, it's not. Yeah. Wow. So, okay. So for the person out there that's listening or, picking up your book, a friend recommended it to them and they're like, yeah, I'm just not empathetic. Like let's just get it done. What does practicing empathy actually look like in, just like a high pressure business conversation? Are you able to somehow make it more tangible for people who just may not be able to grasp it?
Totally. Because it doesn't mean you're not going to get it done. Having empathy does not mean not having boundaries. And having empathy doesn't mean business doesn't get done. These are businesses. And I mean, the height of not having empathy would be allowing these things to sink and having everybody be without a job. There's no connection or perspective taking there at all. So the whole point is that you're trying to understand and connect with others by taking their perspective. If you do that, you have stronger teams, you have better collaborations, and you can actually connect with all of your stakeholders from the board of directors to the customer to the employee. And when you can do that, you actually have a business organism that works instead of having one where everybody is in different places, where it's horribly dysfunctional. I'm working with one now where the leader is just so completely tone deaf. She's out of touch. and she's so out of touch that she doesn't even realize it. She's completely not aware of what's happening at all. Whereas if she took the time to consider other people's perspectives, it would probably be a real shock to her. I read a statistic the other day that 92% of people in leadership positions think they have empathetic organizations, and only 48% of employees agree. So there's obviously a disconnect there. If these leaders actually connected those dots, can you imagine how supercharged those organizations could be?
Mm. Wow. I would love to see a world like that, Melissa. And it seems like
Yeah.
you're putting in the time and energy to at least connect some of those dots. You know,
Well,
a lot Go ahead, I'm sorry.
well, well, no, just I appreciate it because I think you're right. I mean, people aren't just going to take it at face value. There has to be a reason for it. But I really believe there is, and I've seen incredible success that actually happens pretty quick when people instill it. So,
Mm,
you know, that's
mm.
the idea.
Yeah, so what about, you have sort of this whole type A, type B, whether that's true or not, that's another conversation, but you have type A personalities, sort of command personalities. If they do the DISC assessment test, they're a D. How can someone like that lean into empathy? People who just don't feel like they necessarily are empathetic. Like, can you be direct and empathetic?
Yeah.
Like that, how does that work?
Absolutely, you can. I mean, because again, it doesn't mean that you don't have boundaries. It doesn't mean that you don't want to get business to get done, and it doesn't mean that you need to change who you are. It's all about understanding connection and perspective taking. I can be direct and say exactly what's on my mind and, be authentically that kind of high D. But if I do it with an understanding of what's going on with that other person, the outcome is going to be completely different
Mm,
than if I'm just like barking orders. I mean, that's when you get people that aren't listening. That's when your communication goes down the drain. In 2024, we wasted in the US $1.2 trillion with a T to bad communication. If you're actually taking the time to understand the other person's perspective, you're not wasting all that money on bad communication. You're not throwing money down the drain on the 4-day work week, which is what they call it because people waste 7.5 hours per employee per week on bad communication. So, I mean, even right there, if you only used it for better communication, you'd see it in your bottom line. If you put it towards employee attrition and understand why people are leaving, it would have an effect on the bottom line.
mm,
You know, even if you were super hyper focused about it and said, I'm only going to be empathic when I'm dealing with communication, you would see it in that bottom line. And I mean, businesses survive in order to make money. So I can't think of a better reason other than that to start trying to think about bringing this in as a skill.
mm. Yeah, that's a lot of zeros. I didn't realize that much money was pretty much going down the drain. Wow.
Yeah. And that's 2024. I'm willing to bet this year's report is even worse or higher or however you care to think of it.
Yeah, wow. It's just so hard to believe. Goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. So I just want to change gears a bit, Melissa. I have a lot of aspiring authors who listen to the podcast who are thinking about writing a book. Maybe they've started, stopped. Maybe they found a couple of shady publishers and just feel like they don't want to move forward. If someone listening feels like they have a story but can't seem to start, feel stuck, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them?
I'd say to start by actually speaking it because so many of us we're so used to telling our story. I mean, that's what I did. I started by actually recording my story and then listening to it and transcribing it out because I knew I could tell my story easier than I could write it. And I was also like, okay, I've told my whole story. It's recorded. If I don't get to it today, it's still there. If I'm doing it in fits and starts, it's still there. I can come back to it. So, I mean, that would be my advice is to, speak it into existence and start with
Mhm.
that because you can
That's
always
really good.
clean it up. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's really good. That's actually how I've gotten my books out there. Just to your point, we normally talk, we normally speak our stories. We don't normally write them down. It's just so much more natural for people. And I don't think a lot of people still realize that you can do that, even though it is something that people have been doing for a long time now.
Yeah, absolutely. I have one friend that did it on AI, but it isn't that AI wrote it. It's just that they spoke it somehow. I don't know how it all worked, but they spoke it into AI. So AI just transcribed it, and then they went back and they changed it and they did the stuff they needed to do with it. And AI didn't write it. They wrote it, but they started by doing it, by word of mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. It just seems like this is probably the best time or the easiest time in history to become an author if you just commit to it. There's just so many different ways to get your story out there. You just gotta do it. Just gotta do it.
Yeah. And if you can find the right person to help you along, that's invaluable. It really is.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. Teamwork makes the dream work, even if it's just one person.
Totally.
So you might have answered this question just now, but I want to ask it just in case you didn't. What's one practice, habit, or mindset that helped you cross the finish line of actually getting your book done?
Being persistent. It seemed like both in the writing and in the publishing process and in, even now that the book is out and kind of being in the now what do I do kind of phase, it's just being very stubborn about it and having a real belief that what I had to say had a place in the world.
Mm. And would you say that persistence in general, does that come easy for you? Like generally when you start something, are you able just to kind of ride it through, or do you find yourself kind of getting back on track?
Yeah, I'd say it's about half and half. If I'm motivated to do it and I really want to do it, I'll do it. But
Mm.
it can be in fits and starts, because it's kind of like, are you sure you want this out there? Are you sure you want people to read this? Are you sure you think this is good enough? That good enough and the imposter syndrome. And that was a tough one for me. So, and I'm sure I'm not the only author that deals with that. So,
No, I think we all have a little imposter syndrome with us.
yeah.
Mm. So, Melissa, I like to end each episode with what I call the final chapter, just a chance for you to leave one lasting message. Um, let's just say you're sitting across from someone who's carrying a story they haven't started. What's one piece of advice you'd give them to help them begin?
That what you have to say is important and it is worthy. So be persistent because the world needs to hear what you have to say.
Mm. Love that. Melissa, this has been incredible. Where can our listeners find your book and follow your journey and just see what you're doing?
So if you go to my website, which is EQ Via, and that's V as in Victor, IA, empathy. It's EQ Via Empathy. And you sign up for my newsletter, I will send a chapter of the book. So it's kind of like an appetizer so people can take a look and see what they think. I'm also on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. I do have my own podcast, which is called The Empathic Leader. And you can get my book either at the website or on Amazon or Barnes and Nobles or Kobo or, wherever online you go to get books.
That's great, Melissa. Thank you so much for being on the Resilient Author podcast. Really enjoyed just hearing your story, and I'm excited to finish reading your book because I feel like there's a lot of gems in there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I've really appreciated it. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Resilient Author podcast. I hope today's conversation gave you both inspiration and practical tools for your own journey. If you've been carrying the idea for a book, but haven't started, or you started and feel stuck, I'd love to invite you to join my 5-day Speak Your Book Challenge. In just 5 days, you'll speak the outline of your first draft and discover how to turn it into a finished manuscript and a published book. You can join anytime at voicetobook.co/challenge. Until next time, keep going, stay resilient, and remember, your story matters.